And as South Africa waits for U.S. agencies to supply the evidence to substantiate allegations that SA may have sold arms to Russia, and South Africa appoints an independent inquiry into the matter, we look at where relations lie today. What's at stake and where to next in the delicate matter of diplomacy and cooperation between the two countries? Dr. Sydney Mufamadi, President Cyril Ramaphosa's national security advisor, led a delegation to the U.S. to address with his counterpart there a U.S. resolution calling for a review of relations between the two countries. And it comes as U.S. Ambassador Reuben Brigety made claims that arms and ammunition were loaded onto a Russian ship in Simonstown last year. According to Dirco, Brigety has apologized, but the exact merits of that apology have not been disclosed. Professor Christopher Isike is the director at the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Pretoria and joins us now. Good evening to you and welcome. This has taken so many twists and turns over the last couple of days, but perhaps to talk about some of the impacts of the diplomatic moves or non-maneuvering over the last 4 days, there's talk tonight about the possibility of secondary sanctions on South Africa. How remote or real a possibility is that?
Well, good evening, and thanks for having me on your show. Yes, like you said, it's been a roller coaster since Thursday, Friday till date. Positions have been changing. I don't think that the possibility still exists for any kind of serious sanctions on South Africa for now. I think the intention of the U.S. ambassador and maybe the U.S. government at this stage was to draw South Africa's attention and the attention of South Africans to what could be possible if it doesn't think very carefully about how it chooses to, continue to relate with Russia in terms of how people see it, those in the West, the US, and, anyone who thinks that South Africa should be more neutral or more passive in its non-alignment policy.
So one of the priorities for Dr. Mufamadi was for South Africa to remain part of the AGOA trade pact. And it's been a big talking point since this happened. What's at stake from an economic perspective? More lucrative for South Africa is AGOA than its trading benefits from Russia. We had a record year, for example, in automotive exports to the US. How at risk, given what you've seen and recent developments, is this?
Well, look, let's be clear that from the beginning, there's always been that possibility that South Africa may not be included in the list after 2025, because South Africa's economy has shown to, generally be better than those that the opportunities for AGOA was actually intended. So that possibility does exist. But if South Africa loses it for any reason, it will be a big hit. I mean, just between by 2021 alone, South Africa made almost $3 billion, from AGOA trade alone. So there are benefits that accrue to the country that could be at risk if the US decides to sanction South Africa for this particular breach. But it has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt that indeed the government was actively involved in exchanging or selling arms to Russia. Is that kind. That has not been put on the table yet, so we cannot say for sure that it happened. And even if that happened, whether it was done with the active connivance or involvement of the South African government.
I mean, as you say, still no concrete evidence of a weapons exchange, and Mufamadi is not ruling out the possibility that it could have happened outside official channels that warranted looking into, hence this inquiry. And I'm wondering about how long a diplomatic game South Africa is playing here. But because we're running out of time, I really want to ask you about this issue. The news conference that Dr. Sydney Mufamadi gave also tells a story about the influence the US believes South Africa has with the Russians. When Mufamadi talked about the food blockade, for example, against Ukraine, and how the US intimated South Africa intervened, and when they did, it was successfully lifted, it said something about how serious these relations are. And I'd really like your view on how tight South Africa really is with Russia.
Well, and I think that there is some tightness there, and the way South Africa has played it so far with the Russians, I'm sure the Russians will be very pleased with that. And And that consideration, I must tell you, is one of the reasons why I believe that the US may not take very serious punitive actions against South Africa. Because South Africa has a pathway, to resolving the conflict peacefully if there is still that chance of resolving the Ukraine peacefully. South Africa does present that opportunity through direct links with Putin, through Ramaphosa, and of course through the BRICS Forum. And I think that the United States is not taking that for granted, beyond looking at the economics of it all. The only challenge there, though, is that Dr. Mufamadi did talk about the fact that South Africa is actively non-aligned, and that means that it gives South Africa an opportunity, to relate with both Russia and the United States in the interest of its economy, and so it needs to do that very carefully. But again, he also said that South Africa is anti-war, and being anti-war, means that South Africa is a South African foreign policy value, right? What that would mean, therefore, is that South Africa should not necessarily have been voting to abstain from the UNGA vote if it was actually practicing its values of being anti-war. And those are some of the contradictions in its foreign policy, behavior and its stated foreign policy values that, the US are not very comfortable with and are trying to push as much as they can to ensure that they get South Africa to be a bit more neutral than it is currently.
Yeah. Interesting take, Professor Christopher Isike. Thank you for sharing it with us and our viewers. Prof. Isike is director at the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Pretoria.